Welcome back.
Yeah.
Today we're undertaking a deep dive into one of the most intense, probably the most philosophically challenging issue in bioethics.
Yeah.
Abortion.
Mm-hmm.
It's a topic that, so often gets boiled down to slogans, sound bites.
Absolutely. Bitter debate, not much listening.
Exactly. So our mission today is really to cut through that noise, look at the core reasoned arguments from the best sources we have, and lay them out clearly for you.
Right. We want to move past the, let's say, the public rhetoric and really get into the philosophical, the legal, the applied arguments. The goal is for you to walk away with a genuinely nuanced understanding of the claims, surrounding the morality of abortion.
Okay, sounds good. So let's build that foundation first. Maybe start with the terminology.
Good idea. So primarily we're talking about induced abortion. That's the intentional termination of a pregnancy.
Okay, intentional. Got it.
And that's different from spontaneous abortion, which is just the clinical term for a natural miscarriage.
Right. And there's one more.
Yes, therapeutic abortion. That's specifically when it's done to preserve the mother's life or her health, so different motivations there.
Okay. And then there are these developmental points that always come up.
Mm-hmm. Key benchmarks. The discussion often starts right at conception, the moment the zygote is formed. Biologically, that's the beginning.
But historically, that wasn't always the focus, was it?
No, not at all. For centuries, people looked to quickening. That's when the mother first feels the fetus move.
Ah, right. I've heard that term.
Yeah, and we now know the fetus moves much earlier, but that sensation was a huge cultural marker, sometimes even a legal one.
Interesting. And the last one, crucial for the legal stuff later.
Viability, usually around 23, maybe 24 weeks. It's the stage where a fetus might survive outside the uterus, though it's important to add, often with a lot of medical help and high risks.
Okay, so conception, quickening, viability. Got it.
What's really fascinating, though, is looking back historically, the views on this, they weren't fixed at all. Well, you look at the ancient world. Aristotle, for instance, he suggested abortion should happen before life and sense have begun.
Before life and sense. So not just about biology, but about function.
Exactly. It suggests personhood or moral status was linked to a developmental stage, not just existence. And even the Hippocratic Oath, which forbade giving abortifacients, existed alongside many societies where abortion was practiced.
And what about the religious texts? They're central to the debate now.
Well, yes, but the historical context is often surprising. The Hebrew and Christian scriptures, they don't actually have an explicit condemnation of abortion.
No explicit line saying, don't do this.
No. And there's a passage people point to, Exodus 21. It deals with causing a miscarriage, the penalty. It's a fine, not the death penalty you'd expect for murder.
Ah, so that implies a fetus wasn't seen as a full person under that specific law.
Precisely. That's a strong indicator. And this view, is consistent with traditional Jewish law, where the fetus only gains full personhood at birth.
Wow. And even within Catholicism, the idea of personhood at conception wasn't always the rule.
Correct. For a very long time, centuries actually, the church was influenced by Aristotle. They believed in something called mediate ensoulment.
Mediate ensoulment. What does that mean?
It means the soul wasn't thought to enter the body right at conception. It came later, once the physical form was developed enough. The specific timing varied, but it was often cited as 40 days for a male embryo, 90 days for a female.
40 and 90 days. That's very specific.
It is, and it was only in the late 19th century, 1869 to be exact, that the official church doctrine shifted to what it is now. Ensoulment right at conception.
So the current stance is relatively recent in the grand scheme of things.
Relatively, yes. And it really highlights that this line, this moral status line, it's always been a matter of interpretation of theology, of cultural agreement, not just some simple biological fact everyone agreed on.
Okay, that's crucial context. Let's shift to the present day facts on the ground, particularly in the U.S. You mentioned stats earlier.
Right. Well, the data shows abortion rates have actually been declining. They hit a historic low. Documented in 2014 at 14.6 abortions per 1,000 women aged 15 to 44.
So lower than many people might assume?
Yeah.
And what about safety? That's a big part of the public discussion.
It is, and the medical reality is very clear. Early first trimester abortions, especially the common suction curettage method, are extremely safe procedures, medically speaking.
Safer than?
Safer than carrying a pregnancy to term.
Right.
The risk of death from childbirth is actually at least 10 times higher than the risk from an early abortion.
10 times higher. That's
significant. It is. And these early procedures have virtually no proven long-term risks to future fertility or health. That medical safety data is absolutely essential for, a balanced picture.
okay. And the reasons, why do women choose abortion?
Well, the research, like studies from the Guttmacher Institute, consistently finds the reasons center on socioeconomic realities and responsibilities to others.
Such as?
The three most common are: 1, concern for or responsibility to other people, like existing children; 2, not being able to afford to raise a child; and 3, the belief that having a baby would fundamentally interfere with work, school, or caring for dependents they already have.
So these aren't trivial reasons. They're serious life considerations.
Exactly. Deeply serious, often complex decisions about capacity and responsibility.
And what about the psychological impact? There's a common narrative about long-term regret or trauma.
Right, but the best scientific evidence doesn't really support that as a widespread outcome. There was a major rigorous study published in JAMA Psychiatry back in 2016.
What did it find?
It compared women who received abortions with women who sought them but were denied because they were past gestational limits. The finding was clear. Women who had the abortion did not experience more depression, anxiety, PTSD, or lower self-esteem than those who were denied one. In fact, being denied an abortion was linked to worse initial psychological outcomes in some cases.
So the idea of universal negative mental health consequences isn't borne out by that large study.
Not according to that significant piece of research, no. It suggests the distress is more often linked to the circumstances leading to the decision or potentially being denied care rather than the procedure itself.
Okay, let's pivot now to the legal arena. This is where these philosophical and social battles played out for decades in the U.S. Obviously, we have to start with Roe v. Wade, 1973.
Absolutely foundational. Roe established a woman's constitutional right to an abortion. It rooted this right in the right to privacy,
Which comes from?
the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. And, very importantly, the Supreme Court in Roe explicitly looked at the word person, as used in the Constitution, particularly the 14th Amendment, and they concluded that the word person does not include the unborn. That was a critical part of the legal reasoning.
So legally, under Roe, the fetus wasn't a constitutional person, and the court used viability, right? That marker we defined earlier.
Yes, exactly. Viability became the key line. Roe set up this trimester framework based on it.
Can you break that down quickly?
Sure. First trimester, the state basically couldn't interfere with the woman's decision made with her doctor.
Okay.
Second trimester, so pre-viability. The state could regulate, but only in ways reasonably related to protecting the woman's health.
Makes.
Then, post-viability, third trimester. The state's interest in the potential life became compelling, so it could regulate and even ban abortion except when necessary to save the life or health of the woman.
Okay, that framework lasted for quite a while.
Right.
But it changed, didn't it?
It did. That rather rigid trimester structure was replaced in 1992 in the case Planned Parenthood v. Casey.
Casey, what did it do?
Well, Casey did two main things. First, it reaffirmed what it called the essential holding of Roe, the woman's right to choose an abortion before viability without undue interference from the state.
So the core right survived.
Yes. But second, it threw out the trimester framework and replaced it with the undue burden standard. This became the new test.
Undue burden, what does that mean legally?
The court defined it as any state regulation that has the purpose or effect of placing a substantial obstacle in the path of a woman seeking an abortion of a non-viable fetus.
A substantial obstacle. That sounds vaguer than trimesters.
It is more flexible or vaguer, depending on your view. It allowed for more regulation pre-viability than Roe did, as long as it didn't create this undue burden.
Can you give examples? What wasn't an undue burden under Casey?
Sure. The court upheld things like informed consent laws requiring specific information be given, 24-hour waiting periods, and parental consent laws for minors, as long as there was a judicial bypass option.
Okay. And what was struck down as an undue burden?
The key example from Casey itself was spousal notification, requiring a woman to tell her husband.
Why was that an undue burden?
Because the court recognized that for women in abusive relationships, such a requirement could pose a very real substantial obstacle, potentially leading to psychological or physical harm. It acknowledged the reality of domestic violence.
I see. So the legal system, with Roe and Casey, tried to find this sort of practical line, viability mainly, but also balancing state interest with the woman's rights, using this undue burden idea.
Right. But philosophers would say the real issue, the deep moral disagreement, isn't about viability per se. It's about the fundamental moral status of the fetus.
Okay, let's dive into that philosophical standoff then. This is really the heart of the ethical debate.
It is. And you basically have two main camps, broadly speaking. The conservative argument, and the liberal argument.
Let's start with the conservative view. What's the core claim?
The conservative position rests on a simple, powerful premise. It's wrong to kill an innocent human being. Then, they argue, a fetus, from the moment of conception, is an innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is wrong.
And why from conception? Why not later?
They argue that development is a continuous process. There's no non-arbitrary point after conception to suddenly grant moral status. Conception is when you get the unique genetic code, the full biological blueprint for a human. So for them, that's the only logical, non-arbitrary starting point for personhood, or at least for having a right to life.
The full genetic code is key for them.
Yes. Some also frame it as the fetus being a potential person from conception and arguing that this potential grants it the same moral rights as an actual person already possessing those characteristics.
Okay. Now, the liberal argument, how does it respond?
The liberal argument pushes back strongly. It denies that simply being biologically human, having Homo sapiens DNA, is enough to grant full moral rights or personhood.
They warn against, what was the term?
Speciesism. That's the idea that membership in the human species by itself is the basis for superior moral status. Liberals say that's a prejudice, like racism or sexism.
So if not biology, then what does grant personhood for them?
They argue it requires certain traits, certain capacities. Things like consciousness, reasoning abilities, self-awareness, the capacity for communication, agency. Kinds of things we typically associate with being a person in the everyday sense.
And because a fetus, especially early on, lacks these traits.
It's not considered a person in the morally relevant sense. Therefore, it doesn't possess a right to life that can outweigh the pregnant woman's bodily autonomy and life choices.
Okay, that seems clear. But this liberal position faces a pretty tough challenge, doesn't it? The infanticide challenge.
Yes, that's the immediate and probably most potent objection, critics say. Look, if a fetus isn't a person because it lacks reasoning and self-awareness, well, neither does a newborn infant, right? So if abortion is okay, why isn't infanticide also acceptable?
How do liberal philosophers typically respond to that? It seems like a logical consequence.
It's a difficult point. The standard replies usually go along a couple of lines. First, some argue that infants, while perhaps not full persons yet, are so very close to being persons. They have the developed structures and are on the immediate cusp of developing those traits, so killing them still requires immensely strong justification, unlike an early fetus.
Okay. Close proximity argument. What else?
Second, there's often a more pragmatic or utilitarian-style argument. Allowing infanticide, even if theoretically consistent for some, would be incredibly damaging to society. It would undermine vital social sentiments, the natural warmth, sympathy, and protective instincts people feel towards babies. These feelings are socially valuable, and legalizing infanticide would erode them.
So even if an infant isn't technically a person by their definition, killing it is still wrong for these other social or near-personhood reasons?
That's the gist of the counterargument, yes. It tries to hold the line against infanticide without conceding personhood at birth based solely on the liberal criteria.
Right, these are really deep, difficult divisions. Conception versus consciousness. It makes sense that some philosophers tried to find different ways to approach this, maybe avoid that head-on clash.
Exactly. The starkness of the conservative-liberal divide pushed thinkers to explore alternative, sometimes called moderate, frameworks. One of the absolute most famous and influential comes from Judith Jarvis Thomson.
Thomson, right. What was her approach?
Thomson did something brilliant, really. She said, okay, for the sake of argument, let's grant the conservative premise. Let's assume the fetus is a person with a full right to life from conception.
Okay, so she starts by agreeing with the opposition, temporarily.
Yes, and even then, she argues, abortion can still be morally permissible in many cases.
How does she get there?
Her core insight is this. A right to life, even a full one, does not automatically guarantee you the right to use another person's body to stay alive, especially if that use is involuntary for the body's owner.
The right to life doesn't equal a right to someone else's resources, essentially.
Precisely. And she makes this point incredibly vivid with her famous thought experiment, the kidnapped violinist analogy.
Ah, yes. Can you walk us through that? It really helps visualize her point.
Sure. Imagine you wake up one morning and find you've been kidnapped by the Society of Music Lovers. You're lying in a hospital bed, and plugged into you, back to back, is a famous, unconscious violinist.
Okay. Weird morning.
Definitely. You're told he has a fatal kidney ailment, and your kidneys alone can save him. You've been plugged into him, and you need to stay plugged in for 9 months. After that, he'll be cured and can be safely unplugged.
9 months, just like a pregnancy term.
Exactly. Now, the question Thomson asks is, Are you morally obligated to stay plugged in? The violinist is definitely a person with a right to life. But did you consent to this arrangement? No.
Right, you were kidnapped.
So Thompson argues, while it might be kind or charitable of you to stay plugged in, you are not morally required to. You have the right to unplug yourself, even though you know the violinist will die as a result.
So unplugging isn't the same as actively killing him unjustly.
That's her point. It's withdrawing the use of your body, which he had no right to in the first place without your consent. She argues this maps onto pregnancies resulting from rape, clearly, but also potentially onto cases of contraceptive failure, where the woman didn't voluntarily agree to sustain a new life with her body.
That's a really powerful argument focusing on bodily autonomy, even if you grant fetal personhood.
It shifted the debate significantly. It doesn't deny the fetus might have value, but it centers the woman's right not to have her body used without consent.
Okay. Another really influential thinker who tried to bypass the personhood debate is Don Marquis.
Yes, Marquis offered the future like ours argument, often called the FLO argument.
Future like ours was the idea there.
Marquis starts by asking, what makes killing a typical adult human being wrong? His answer isn't about personhood traits now, but about what killing deprives the victim of.
Which is
A future. Specifically, a future of value, a future like ours, filled with all the experiences, activities, projects, enjoyments that make life valuable. Killing someone takes all of that away, and that's what makes it seriously wrong.
okay. Loss of a valuable future is the wrong-making feature of killing.
Exactly. Then he applies this to abortion. Does a standard fetus have a future like ours? Yes, he argues. If allowed to develop, it will have experiences, projects, etc., just like any child or adult.
So because abortion deprives the fetus of that valuable future.
Abortion is, on the face of it, prima facie, seriously morally wrong for the same reason killing an adult is wrong.
That is a clever way around the personhood arguments. It doesn't rely on consciousness or genetics.
Right. Its power lies in identifying a feature, the value of a future that both fetuses and adults share, seemingly making the moral status consistent.
But does it face challenges? Like, can an early embryo really have a future in the same sense if it lacks any capacity to value it yet?
That's the main line of criticism. Critics ask if you can truly be deprived of something you have no conception of or connection to. Does the mere biological potential constitute having a future of value in the morally relevant sense? Marquis argues the loss is objective, the future value exists, whether the fetus currently knows it or not, but it's definitely a point of contention.
Okay, let's briefly touch on a couple of other ethical frameworks. How might, say, Kantian ethics view abortion?
Well, for Kant, it hinges entirely on that personhood question. Remember Kant's categorical imperative, especially the formulation about treating humanity never merely as a means, but always as an end in itself.
Right, don't use people.
Exactly. So if the fetus is considered a person possessing rational nature, which is key for Kant, then aborting it, say, for convenience or to avoid lifestyle changes, would be using it merely as a means to the woman's ends. That would be impermissible.
But if the fetus is not a person,
Then it doesn't possess that inherent worth under Kantianism. In that case, the woman's autonomy, her rational will, and her sovereignty over her own body would likely be the paramount considerations. So the entire Kantian analysis depends on that prior determination of fetal status.
very clear split based on the personhood premise.
Yeah.
What about natural law theory?
Natural law ethics, often associated with Catholic moral theology, holds that directly killing innocent human life is always intrinsically wrong, violating the natural inclination to preserve life.
So direct abortion is out.
Yes. However, they employ the doctrine of double effect. This is crucial.
Double effect. How does that work here?
It allows for actions that have two effects. One good, intended, and one bad, foreseen but unintended. The action itself must be good or neutral. The intention must be only for the good effect, and the good effect can't be achieved by means of the bad effect.
Okay. How does that apply?
It means that procedures necessary to save the mother's life, which indirectly but foreseeably result in the fetus's death, can be permissible. The classic examples are removing a cancerous uterus containing a fetus, or treating an ectopic pregnancy where the fetus implants outside the uterus, posing a fatal risk to the mother.
So the intention is to save the mother, and the fetal death is a foreseen but unintended side effect.
Correct. The death isn't the means to saving the mother, it's a consequence of the life-saving treatment. Direct abortion, where the death is the intended means, remains forbidden under this doctrine.
Interesting distinction. Finally, what about feminist ethics? How does that perspective change the conversation?
Feminist ethicists like Susan Sherwin and Margaret Olivia Little argue that the whole debate has been wrongly focused on abstract questions of fetal personhood, detached from the reality of women's lives.
What should the focus be then?
On the relational context, pregnancy happens within a woman's body. Sherwin argues the fetus's moral significance isn't some absolute fixed property, but is inherently relational, tied to the woman carrying it, her relationships, her social context. The woman's autonomy and lived experience must be central.
So, less about abstract rights, more about concrete lives and relationships.
Yes. And they also connect it to broader issues of social justice, power, and reproductive freedom. They argue that controlling women's reproductive choices is historically linked to controlling women themselves.
And Margaret Olivia Little adds another layer, right, about motherhood.
Yes, Little makes a really insightful point. She suggests that often the decision to have an abortion isn't just about avoiding pregnancy, it's about declining the profound identity and life-altering commitment of motherhood.
Declining an identity, not just a biological process.
Exactly. She argues that becoming a mother fundamentally restructures your life, your self-conception. And respecting women's moral agency means respecting their prerogative to make or decline such deeply personal, identity-constituting commitments. It reframes the decision in a powerful way.
Okay, that gives us a really broad map of the philosophical landscape. Let's try to bring these theories down to earth a bit with some specific, tricky cases mentioned in the source material. First, what about abortions for minor disabilities or anomalies? Things like club feet or cleft lips.
Right, this raises immediate red flags for many people. It pushes the question of what constitutes a serious handicap that might justify termination.
How would different theories approach this?
Well, a strict conservative view based on personhood at conception would say it's irrelevant, abortion is wrong regardless. But someone using, say, a quality of life framework might struggle. Opponents, perhaps drawing on disability rights perspectives or even Kantian ideas about not treating people as means, would argue that terminating for a correctable, non-life-threatening condition is discriminatory. It values perfection over the person.
A very tough ethical line to draw. What about sex selection abortions? The example given is India, with estimates of millions of female births lost over decades.
This is deeply troubling for almost all ethical frameworks, frankly. It's a clear case of gender discrimination with massive negative social consequences.
How might different ethics analyze it?
A utilitarian would have to weigh any perceived parental benefit against the huge societal harm of gender imbalance and the intrinsic wrongness of discrimination. A Kantian would likely condemn it for treating the fetus merely as a means to fulfilling a gender preference. Feminist ethics would strongly condemn it as a manifestation of patriarchal values and the devaluation of females. It's hard to find ethical justification for sex selection in most mainstream theories.
Yeah, that seems pretty clear-cut ethically, even if complex socially. And the last case. Prenatal testing leading to high termination rates for conditions like Down syndrome.
This is incredibly complex and sensitive. We have reliable prenatal tests now, and the statistics show that in many places, upwards of 90% of pregnancies diagnosed with Down syndrome are terminated.
The chapter mentions Sarah Ito's story.
Yes, an advocate with Down syndrome who speaks powerfully about the value of her life and the lives of others with the condition. Her perspective, and that of many parents raising children with Down syndrome, challenges the assumptions that often lead to termination.
It forces a really difficult question, doesn't it? Are we preventing suffering? Or are we essentially trying to eliminate certain kinds of human diversity because they don't fit a narrow norm?
Precisely. It puts different values head to head. Is the goal to maximize certain capacities or to embrace human variation? A conservative view would say the diagnosis is irrelevant to the right to life. A liberal view focused on autonomy might say the parent's choice prevails. Feminist ethics might analyze the social pressures and support systems, or lack thereof, available to families raising children with disabilities. There's no easy answer here. It highlights profound disagreements about the goals of medicine and the meaning of a valuable life.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a huge amount of ground: history, law, facts, deep philosophy, tough cases. As we wrap up, can you maybe distill the core conflict one more time? What's the nub of the issue?
I think the central takeaway is the persistent, seemingly irresolvable lack of consensus on where to draw the moral status line for the fetus. We've seen basically three major families of positions. One, the conservative view. Personhood begins at conception, making abortion morally akin to killing. Two, the liberal view. Personhood requires certain cognitive capacities, consciousness, reason, which the fetus lacks, so abortion is permissible. Three, moderate alternative approaches. These try to sidestep the personhood binary, focusing instead on things like bodily autonomy, Thomson, or the value of a future, Marquis, or relational context, feminist ethics. But none of these has achieved universal assent, even among philosophers using reasoned argument.
Right. And that leads to a final thought for you, our listeners, to maybe chew on. We saw the U.S. legal system, particularly in Roe and Casey, essentially land on a physical marker of viability as the point where the state's interest could become compelling enough to regulate or ban abortion. It was a pragmatic compromise, in a way. Yet, as we've just discussed, the philosophical community offers such widely different conclusions about the moral starting point conception, sentence, birth, relational status, future value. What does it tell us about the limits of moral reasoning? Or perhaps the nature of legal authority, when society has to find a practical legal line on an issue where even the most careful philosophical arguments lead to such fundamentally opposing conclusions about life itself? Something to think about.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the complex ethics of abortion. We really hope this exploration equips you with the context and the frameworks to engage with this incredibly important topic with more nuance and understanding.
We appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you next time.